wow, do we have a special CPAC Now America Uncanceled. It's kind of like Israel Uncanceled, because we're here at CPAC Israel. Mercy and I are here with all the kids in a wonderful delegation from America, and we're here with a very special person, someone who has led in so many ways, who understands America uniquely,
a little bit,
and did a really important job for Prime Minister Netanyahu as the ambassador to America, Ron Dermer. Thanks for having us in Israel.
Well, great to have you here in Israel, and enjoy your stay here. In Israel, life is measured in dog years, so a day here will feel like a week. So if you're here for a week, you're going to feel like 2 months, and we're going to squeeze every ounce out of you to enjoy our wonderful country that brings together the ancient and the modern, the spiritual highs and just the fabulous innovation economy. There's so much to see Israel in such a small place. So it's great to have you here.
Is it about the size of New Jersey?
Yes, in its biggest form, it's the size of New Jersey, but we leave a very big footprint on the world. The Jews are a very tiny people who've left a big imprint in world history, and we gave the world a lot of its religious ideas, like the idea that everyone is created in the image of God, or rule of law, or caring for widows and orphans and strangers. That really comes from the Bible and spread really through Christianity to a great part of humanity. But Israel, modern Israel, that's only 74 years young, has also left a very big imprint. Is punching well above its weight in so many different areas, in innovation, in bringing discoveries all over the world, whether it's quenching the thirst of people in Africa, or going over to Nepal after a disaster to set up a field hospital. There's so much innovation in Israel that is improving the world. So we're very excited, and we're looking forward to many decades of continuing to leave a huge imprint on humanity.
You were mentioning and talking to some of our members here in the delegation about the importance of the United States and Israeli relationship, and how that is really going to be the key relationship 50 years from now.
Right.
What is your sense of where we are in terms of our relationship between the United States and Israel right now? Obviously, we had President Joe Biden, who did a stop-by, came in, came out. Where do you think it's heading, and how do you see this playing out with the other Arab countries in the area?
Well, the interests of the United States and Israel are pulling us together, both your national security interests and also your interests in national prosperity, especially as you battle with China for who's going to control the 21st century. I think Israel becomes your most important partner in the entire world and the most important ally of the United States in the 21st century. So I'm very bullish on the U.S.-Israel relationship. We have policy disagreements sometimes. We certainly have with the current administration, in particular about Iran, but there are other issues as well. We'll have to figure out how we're going to work through them, because Iran is a regime that openly calls and actively works to destroy Israel. So we have a very clear view of people who want to destroy us, not giving them nuclear weapons. We'll have to work through a lot of those issues and work with every president that you elect in the United States and do the best we can to find that common ground. But the new story about the U.S.-Israel relationship is the strength and the importance of this alliance to both countries. That was not always the case. I mean, America was always critical and important for Israel. I think Israel has become much more important to the United States, and I think you're going to see that importance grow. And as you said, over the next 50 years, you're not going to have a better ally who not only shares your interests, who shares your values, but also shares a sense of destiny. And I think this is what people don't understand about the U.S.-Israel relationship. We're not just another country. I mean, there are countries around the world who share interests and values with you. Holland is one of those countries. But Israel and America are not just countries, we're causes.
Yes.
Holland's not a cause. No offense to all your viewers, your Dutch viewers, but Holland's not a cause. America and Israel are. And the only thing that will really undermine this alliance is that if people in America or people in Israel no longer believe that their countries are a cause and a force for good in the world. And my concern is less about Israel, because I think the forces of what we could call Israeli exceptionalism, they're on the march in this country. I think in America, they're in retreat. And I think reversing that and having people believe in the greatness of America and how wonderful a country it was, and we, the Jewish people, know the importance of America. We know what the world was like when America was not the preeminent power in the world. And the last thing we want to see is the eclipse of American power. As America gets stronger, I think it's good for Israel. I think it's good for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And we'd like to contribute in continuing to ensure that America remains the preeminent power in the world.
All right, so we're going to put you on the spot. We'd love to get Prime Minister Netanyahu to come over to America. He gives many great speeches, but we need one at CPAC because CPAC plays an important role in this relationship, I believe, which is why we're here. But more importantly, politics. It's a big vote coming up in Israel. You're close to the former prime minister. He's, Israeli politics is interesting. He's still on the field. Will he be back in power?
Well, first of all, if you ever think that your politics in the United States is dysfunctional, with 2 parties, try 12.
How many times can people vote in Israel? Can they vote one time?
Well, it's not like Chicago where you can keep voting whether you're alive or not. But we've had 5 elections in 3.5 years. The election in Israel will be on November 1st, and I hope very much that we will have a decisive victory. The polls show that Netanyahu, his chances of having a decisive victory are better than 50-50. I think he's reached that magical number of 61 in our polls, which is half of the Israeli parliament. We're a 120-seat parliament, so you need sort of 61 to build a coalition. We're a parliamentary system. We also have coalition governments that Americans, it's very hard for them to understand because the system is so different. All I'll tell people is, as bad as you think the situation is in Washington, come to the Knesset, see 12 parties, 13 parties go after you. You may kiss the ground of the Capitol when you go back, that you have a very good political system with all of its flaws and its imperfections, and there's a lot of things to do. But I think in Israel, I think that Netanyahu has a very good chance to be elected prime minister. He has already served 15 years as prime minister. He had a first term that lasted for 3 years, and then he had a run as prime minister of 12 years between 2009 and 2021. And Netanyahu, in a certain extent, has been the victim of his success. Because when he takes over and he makes Israel safe, a lot of people sometimes take that for granted. In the 12 years that I was with him, I wasn't with him in the first term, but I served by his side for 12 years from 2009 to 2021. That was the safest period in Israel's history of the 12 years. We had a couple of conflicts with Gaza, but if you look at the total number of lives that were lost, it was the fewest in Israel's history in a period of a decade. So the safest decade in Israel's history, the most prosperous decade in Israel's history. And also we had 4 peace agreements, of course, with the support of President Trump and his administration. So peace, prosperity, security, those are all good things. Sometimes people take it for granted. What has happened in the last year, because another government was established, a lot of people saw, well, what does the grass on the other side look like? And they didn't like it. And so therefore, I think that's why he's in a position to come back to office. And I hope he will, as somebody who's been by his side for about 20 years, I hope he will. And I can tell you that I think we have a real opportunity to expand the Abraham Accords. I think we got to deal with the economic situation just like you have here in the United States, and he helped reform Israel's economy, and I think he's a person who can get us back on track there. And ultimately, he's the one who has to deal with the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran.
Real fast, I'll just say, I think people in America would love to have an election in 6 months, so you might have a disagreement.
Well, I got to tell you, we were with a taxi driver. He said, I don't speak very good English, but Bibi and Trump were the 2 things that he very much supported. It's really interesting talking to the people here on the ground in Jerusalem. A lot of support for Bibi, and I think the reality is going to be what happened to the Bennett government? Why did it just all fall apart? What led to that?
Well, because it was ideologically incoherent. Now, imagine in your system that you put in one government Ted Cruz, Elizabeth Warren, and Ilhan Omar. That's what you had. Yeah. You had people on the right. Now, Bennett, when he ran, he went to his voters and he said, I'm more right than Netanyahu. Netanyahu is going to go with the other side. And he actually Naftali Bennett was the prime minister of Israel for a year. He made a pledge, a kind of read my lips pledge on television the day or 2 days before the election. And he said, Netanyahu is saying, I'm going to go with the other side. I won't. And he signs a document. I will never go into a government that will make Yair Lapid prime minister. I will never go in a government and sit with this Islamist party. And then he did exactly that. So he had a problem from the beginning that he had told voters one thing, and he had done the exact opposite. And then you have a government in Israel. We have coalition governments with 4, 5, 6 parties, but never have you had a government that has been so ideologically incoherent, where you have people on the right, people on the left, Islamists all over the spectrum. And so the only thing they had in common was trying to prevent Netanyahu from being prime minister. Right. There was nothing beyond that. And so, okay, you did that on day one. Okay, you pass a budget on day 60 or whatever it is. What are you going to do now? On every issue, they couldn't come to any agreement. And Netanyahu was the head of the opposition, was able to bring it to an election. And I think there has never been a government in Israel's history, or a Knesset, that has been there for such a short amount of time. Before we had these 3 rounds, one after the other, but once the government was established, we've never had a situation which unraveled so much. And I think people, about 70%, think Israel's headed in the wrong direction. I think there's definitely, there was buyer's remorse for that government. There's a lot of longing to have Prime Minister return. And if you ask taxi drivers in Israel, Netanyahu is going to get 90 out of the 120 seats of the Knesset.
We've seen it because we've been in multiple taxis. I'll just say in America, 80% of the people think we're on the wrong track. Maybe there's something about formers coming back.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
So it's my first time here in this beautiful, beautiful country.
Really?
With amazing, yes,
First
never
time.
been. Matt's been here 3 times.
No more.
So we brought our children here, as Matt mentioned, to our viewers. Why should they come here to Jerusalem? Why should they come here to visit Israel? And what is your favorite place that you've been in this country?
Well, they should come here because history comes alive in Israel. There's no other place that combines the ancient and the modern. You know, you go to the United States and you go to the Capitol, and Americans are very excited. You see this Washington Monument that's 150 years old, or you'll go to Monticello and all these sites that are meaningful, Gettysburg, and meaningful in American history, 200 years, 250 years. This is a place that is 3,000, 4,000 years of Jewish history. And it is also the place that is not only important for Jews, it's important for Christians. I mean, this is the land where Jesus walked. It's where the patriarchs of the Jewish people prayed, where the prophets of Israel preached, where the kings ruled. And all of that comes to life. And at the same time, as you feel now probably in your first time here, you're in a modern country. Israel is the only place in the Middle East, for sure, where an American can feel at home. You're in a free society. You walk around. Most people think, and the reason why a lot of people don't come, frankly, is they think it's very dangerous here. They think the security situation. So just to tell your viewers something, about 20 years ago, you remember we had something called the Second Intifada, and we had waves of terrorist bombings. So they took a New Yorker's 2-week trip to Israel, and they put in its itinerary all the places that New Yorker would go, and they determined the most dangerous part of that New Yorker's 2-week trip was the cab ride to Kennedy Airport. So what I hope you will tell your viewers when you come back is how safe you felt. And you who have 5 children, you will feel that here that is a very child-friendly place. It's a great place to visit and vacation and everything else. And there's everything to see in such a small country. You know, one thing that people forget, you take these trips overseas, which Americans do a lot less than a lot of other peoples, but then you have to schlep around from place to place. It's hours traveling. In Israel, you can be in Jerusalem. It's 3 hours to the northern tip of the country. It's 3 hours to the southern tip of the country, everywhere in such a small area. But my favorite place in Israel is probably the City of David, which we are in the King David Hotel. City of David, as the crow flies, is probably a half a mile away. And it's the most impressive archeological site in the world. It's the original city. You know, it says in the Bible that people went up to the temple. Well, if you go to the old city of Jerusalem, which is, the walls are 500 years old. So it's a very, very old city, but it's on top of where the Temple Mount is. And you walk down towards the Temple Mount. That's not actually the original City of David. It's on the southern side. You used to walk up. And where Jesus flipped the table of the money changers, and where people went into the pool and then walked up to purify themselves and walked up to the temple, that all happened in the City of David. And now that's all being uncovered. And there were a lot of people who want to deny the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. They go day after day to say, hey, you know, Israel for the Jews, it's like India for the British, or it's Algeria for the French, or the Congo for the Belgians. But this is the heart of Jewish civilization. This is where the story began, and the City of David brings it all to life.
And we got to go there with our delegation. It was amazing. Ambassador Ron Dermer, thank you so much for being on CPAC Now. Thank you for all the times you've been at CPAC. Thank you for promising to get the next prime minister to CPAC. We really appreciate that. He's not saying anything.
Right, no, we got to go to the videotape. I heard you have something called like fake news where you can split this and this. I will give him my strong recommendation,
Yes, that is great.
but he's the one who ultimately makes the decisions. So
Oh,
I'm just the lowly advisor, but I'll do my best.
Matt, as you said, we're very proud Americans, and we love Israel, and we're so thrilled to be here. So thank you.
And thanks for tuning in to this really special episode.